Good evening, everyone. It's Reverend Mother Rake again, and my goodness, I'm exhausted. It's about 9:30 Chicago time, 7:30 Vegas time. My body has been awake since 3:30 a.m., and I have not stopped going, so I'm about to crash. But before I do, speaking of crashes, I wanted to talk a little bit about airplanes and how that relates to human slavery, the slavery of the human heart. You're probably thinking, okay, I'd like to see this one. Well, give me 3 minutes of your time and I'll explain. See, my husband, Mark, wonderful man, we've been married for 17 years, and I hate doing two things with him. I hate driving when he's in the car, and I hate flying with him, even more than driving. When I'm driving, Mark believes that there is an invisible gas pedal on his side of the car, and that if he slams his foot into the floor as hard as he can, I will somehow get the hint and stops when he wants me to stop. The same is true of flying. He's terrified of flying. Nathan is convinced that his father's becoming an alcoholic because he drinks. Mark has 2 beers a year and an Irish coffee on Christmas that I make for him. I don't have anything other than the wine at Mass. So it kind of was funny that was so disconcerting to Nathan. But anyway, the reason he does this is because he's absolutely terrified of flying, like so many of the human population. And while we know statistically that flying is safer than driving, his argument is, yes, but you can survive a car crash. A friend of mine, one of our seminarians, Bryce, suggested this really interesting app for fear of flying that told you how an airplane worked so you wouldn't worry too much. And I suggested it to Mark. And what he said was he wanted an app that told him wind speed, amount of gas, any trouble in the engine, which way we were going. And I explained to him, you understand that the fear of flying for anyone is loss of control. And controlling outcomes is one of the biggest problems we have as human beings. We seem to think, just like the poem says, that we are the master of our fate and the captains of our souls. No, we're not. There's this great line that says, comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison, yes, that can destroy joy, but I think that an even greater thief of joy, the murderer of joy, is expectation. Expectation is when we think we are entitled to a particular outcome, and that has to do with control. If we want to enter our inner room and encounter God, we have to understand that there is nothing we can control. We like to think God sends suffering so we'll become better people. And that's because we would rather believe that we are unlovable than believe that life is uncertain. That scares us. It means we have no control. And I've got news for you. We don't. Control is an illusion. It's one of those unrealities that so many of us pin our entire being upon. The more you try to control, the more you lose control. Because control is an illusion. It's like chasing the wind, grasping air in a balloon. You hold here tightly, the air moves up here. You hold here tightly, it pops down there. You can't do it. And yet so many of us are convinced that control is the answer. Read any leadership book, any business leadership book for the past 20 years, and you'll see so much about control. Now it's shifting. I think we're realizing that the need to control everything, micromanagement, has become sort of anathema, but that illusion of control persists. And what is control, or the need to control, but fear? What fear? Hebrews 2:14 tells us that Paul explains about Christ. Because the children shared in the flesh and blood, he also shared in him, that through his death he might destroy death and destroy him who had the keys to death, that is, the devil, so that those who through fear of death were slaves all their lives, he could free, by becoming one of us, he could encounter death, kill death, then free us from Satan, who has the keys to the fear of death, which enslaves us. And if you think about it, the fear of death is why we need to control. It's why we're violent. It's why we sin. It's why we aggrandize. That's where pride comes from. It's all about a fear of death, whether it's fear of death of the ego or anything else. But to encounter God, you absolutely must understand that you can control nothing, that you can expect nothing. That's it. No one's ever going to hand you the keys to life and say, here you go, whatever you want, that's what's going to happen. They can't. And the harder you control, the more fearful you become. Look at fear of flying. It's a fear of flying because it's a loss of control. Someone else is flying. And look at how devastating that fear is for people. And it gets worse the more they want to control it. Think about your own life. In order to feel God, to encounter God, you have to give up control and you have to become vulnerable. And you want a practical suggestion for that? Pray naked. I'm not even joking. Pray naked. Don't show God you're a representative. Show God who you are. Feel that vulnerability in prayer and see what happens. You know, we have this tendency to think that we can control everything, that, Jesus is my co-pilot. It's one of my favorites. Jesus is my co-pilot. No, if Jesus is your co-pilot, you need to switch seats. Proverbs 16:9 tells us that a man's heart chooses his way, but the Lord directs his steps. That means that you aren't even a co-pilot. You're a navigator, and you don't even get to plot the course. You make suggestions. And no matter what you say and what plans you lay, you could intend to go that way, and the Lord will direct you that way. And I can tell you from personal experience that, one, there is no way you're going to stop God once he decides you're going in a particular direction. And the more you try, the worse it gets for you. And number two, you don't want to try, because the Lord always brings you home. You just have to hand him the keys and sit back and relax. God bless.